Dungeons & Dragons, today, a global phenomenon. From packed convention halls to blockbuster films and TV series, this game of imagination has shaped popular culture for nearly half a century. But the origins of D&D aren't just about dragons and dungeons. They're about two visionaries, two friends, and a revolutionary idea born in the basement of a Minnesota home. This is the untold story of how Dungeons & Dragons began and how Blackmoor changed the world. The late 1960s were a golden era for hobbyists. Before Dungeons & Dragons, there was wargaming, strategic games that simulated historical battles where players would command armies of miniature soldiers. Gary Gygax, a hobbyist living in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, was deeply involved in this scene. But in Minnesota, a young man named Dave Arneson had a different vision. Wargaming was primarily about grand battles, massive formations of soldiers clashing over vast landscapes. What Dave Arneson did was truly revolutionary. He asked, "What if we zoom in on one soldier? What if we tell his story?" In 1971, in the basement of his friend's house, Dave Arneson began running what would become a legendary campaign, Blackmoor. It wasn't like the war games his friends were used to. Arneson allowed them to control a single character, a hero, not an army, and sent them on quests in a dangerous, magical world. The players weren't just generals, they were adventurers. We had never seen anything like it. Suddenly, instead of worrying about the movement of hundreds of troops, I was thinking about my one character's survival, what he could find, and what treasures were out there in the darkness. Dave was creating something completely new. The players explored dungeons, fought monsters, and leveled up, a term that was practically invented during these sessions. But Blackmoor wasn't just a game. It was the seed of what would become the role-playing game genre. The rules, however, were loose. Arneson improvised, letting imagination and creativity guide his world. Gary Gygax was one of the leading minds in wargaming, co-authoring the rules for Chainmail, a miniature-based game that introduced fantasy elements like dragons and wizards. When he heard about Arneson's Blackmoor campaign, he was intrigued. The two began corresponding, exchanging ideas. Gygax was drawn to Arneson's concept of characters growing in strength and embarking on narrative-driven adventures. Gygax saw something unique in what Arneson was doing. He had always been interested in fantasy literature, Tolkien, Robert E. Howard, but Arneson was taking these stories and making them interactive in a way no one had before. Arneson traveled to Gygax's home in Lake Geneva in 1972, and the two worked to refine the Blackmoor concept into something more formalized. Gygax took Arneson's freewheeling ideas and structured them into a set of rules, a system that would become the foundation for Dungeons & Dragons. In 1974, TSR published the first edition of Dungeons & Dragons. It was a humble release, 3 small booklets packed into a simple box. But within those pages was the culmination of both men's work. Players were given rules for creating characters, building worlds, and embarking on epic quests, but the magic lay in the game's openness. The Dungeon Master, or DM, controlled the world, while the players shaped the narrative through their decisions and dice rolls. The first edition of D&D is fascinating. It's half wargame and half something else entirely. You can see Gygax's focus on structured rules alongside Arneson's emphasis on storytelling and improvisation. The game slowly gained popularity among hobbyists, eventually sparking a revolution in gaming. The idea of role-playing, where players inhabit characters in a shared story, was entirely new, and it changed the landscape of games forever. While Dungeons & Dragons rose to popularity, the partnership between Gygax and Arneson began to unravel. Creative differences and disputes over credit became contentious. Arneson believed his role in creating the game was being overshadowed, while Gygax, as the head of TSR, took on the lion's share of the fame and responsibility. It's a classic story in creative industries. One person gets recognized as the face of the product, and others feel their contributions are being downplayed. Gygax and Arneson had very different visions for D&D, and that difference ultimately drove them apart. In 1979, Arneson sued TSR over royalties, a legal battle that marked the beginning of a long and complicated relationship. Though they would eventually settle, the rift between Gygax and Arneson was never fully healed, and yet both men's fingerprints are all over the game. Today, Dungeons & Dragons is more than a game. It's a cultural touchstone. From Stranger Things to major Hollywood films, its influence can be felt across the entertainment landscape. But it all began with a simple idea. What if you could be someone else for a while? What if you could tell a story together with your friends? What Gygax and Arneson did was invent a new medium. It's not just a game, it's a framework for creativity. That's why it's still relevant today, because it's not bound by the mechanics of dice or miniatures. It's about the human imagination. And though Gary Gygax became the public face of Dungeons & Dragons, it's impossible to tell the full story of this legendary game without Dave Arneson and Blackmoor. His innovations in storytelling, character development, and world building laid the foundation for everything that came after. Together, Gygax and Arneson gave the world the gift of role-playing, a gift that continues to inspire adventurers of all ages. So the next time you sit down at the table, remember the origins of the game. Dungeons & Dragons may have grown into a global phenomenon, but its heart still beats with the spirit of Blackmoor, the legacy of two visionaries, one who structured the rules and one who set imagination free.